Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joy Thompson, and I am the lead naturalist with City of Aurora's Open Space Program. And today, we're going to talk about what is so great about honeybees. So we've all seen honeybees. We know what they look like. We've seen them around. And lately, there's been a lot of buzz about how helpful honeybees are. But what exactly are honeybees? What do they do? And what makes them so helpful? Well, today that's what we're going to find out. And by the end of today, we're going to know that honeybees do a lot of jobs. If somebody calls you a busy bee, there's a reason for that. Honeybees are super busy. But when they're busy and when they do these jobs, not only does it benefit the hive, but it also benefits humans too. So come on, let's take a look at honeybees, okay? So when we think about jobs, we might think about a construction worker. This is somebody who builds something, who makes something that people like to live in. Or maybe we think about this person, a doctor. How many of you have been to a doctor? Maybe gotten some medicine, maybe something to help you feel better. Well, how about this person right here? We think he looks kind of scary because we know him. But we know that this is a park ranger who's outside trying to help keep our outdoor spaces safe. You might think of some of these jobs, and believe it or not, honeybees have to do with all of these jobs and many, many more. So before we start to talk about honeybee jobs, let's talk about what honeybees are and how the way that they are made actually helps them to do their jobs. So obviously here we have a honeybee. I am guessing that most of you know what kind of creature a honeybee is. And if you don't, a honeybee is an insect. Insects have the same makeup, whether they're small or whether they're large. So let's take a look at that makeup. The first thing that insects have are 3 body parts. So we have the head, next we have the thorax, and third we have the abdomen. These are the 3 body parts that you'll find in any insect, but as you can see on our honeybee here, they have little hairs on their head, thorax, and abdomen. These hairs are called setae, and these setae actually help to collect pieces of pollen that the honeybee can bring back to the hive. So that's one way how honeybees are made, helps them do their job. So most insects also have these kind of shiny things up top, which are wings. Now there are a few that don't, but most insects do have them, and honeybees actually have 2 sets or 4 wings all together. And that helps our honeybee to be able to fly from flower to flower to pick up the pollen and the nectar that she needs. Now last but never least, as insects, honeybees have these things on their faces that are called antennae. 1 antenna or 2 antennae. And antennae are sensory organs. So they help our honeybee to do things like smell and feel and even to communicate. You may see some insects doing this with another insect with their antennae. And that actually is them communicating with each other. They're finding out if that other insect is safe or if it's something that they need to be aware of. So the way that a honeybee is built can actually help them to do their job. They sense a lot of things around with their antennae, not just the flowers that they need, but whether they're not they're in danger too. Okay? Now we know what a honeybee is made up of. Let's go ahead and talk about the different kinds of honeybees that are in the hive. So the first and arguably most important member of the honeybee hive is our queen. And as you can see from this picture here, the queen actually has a longer body and a bigger thorax than the other members of the hive. We have another picture to bring up here, and you can see that the beekeeper on this picture here went ahead and tagged their queen so that they could see exactly which one she was and be able to keep an eye on her. The queen's job is to lay eggs. That is what she does all day long. She can lay thousands of eggs in a year. And because she spends her days and her nights and every bit of her time laying eggs, all of these other bees around her take care of her. They feed her, they groom her, and they even take care of her young. So they're very helpful. Now by contrast, the next kind of bee that we have in the hive is this guy here. And he's called a drone bee. And if we look at our next picture here, we can see that the drone has very big eyes. If you see a creature, a honeybee with big eyes like that, you're looking at a drone. The drones are the males, they're the boys. And guess what? They don't do much. Their job is actually to mate with a queen should the need arise. And if that doesn't happen, well, they just lay around and let the other honeybees feed them. Sounds like a pretty good life, doesn't it? But don't get too comfortable, because at the end of the summer, when things start to get cold, because the males can't do anything for the hive, they actually get kicked out. They don't even have a stinger to help defend the hive. So, sorry boys, but at the end of the summer, you get kicked out. No more food for you. Well, who does all this feeding? Who does all this cleaning? If it's not the queen and it's not the drones, it must be the worker bee. And this honeybee right here, these honeybees are always female, they're always girls, and they do the majority of the work in the hive. They're the ones that we see out and about most of the time. Those are your worker bees, and they have a lot of work to do. Now, each honeybee starts their life the same way, so we can go ahead and take a look at our next picture here. The honeybee starts with the queen laying their egg in a wax cell. And if you're wondering what in the world is a cell, well, a cell are these things. These are the little holes that you see in a beehive, or in this case, in a frame from a human-made beehive. These holes hold two things. They hold honey, which you can see in here, and they hold baby bees. They are places where the baby bees can go through their change to grow into adults. So the queen lays the egg inside the wax cell, and after that, once the egg hatches, the larvae, or the baby, are fed by the workers so that they can grow. Once they've grown to the point where they're big enough, the worker puts a cap, a wax cap, on top of the cell so that the larva can then become a pupa and go through a change. Much like you might know that a caterpillar goes into a chrysalis to come out and become a butterfly. That larva will become an adult, and after a few weeks, look what happens. The adult bee merges out of the cell. Oh, I think there's about to be one coming up right now. Take a look at that. That's an adult bee coming out of the cell. Now you can see on the cells around her, all the other cells that have caps on top. Those caps are meant to keep the larvae safe while they're going through their change, while they're pupating, as we say. And do you know how she gets out of that cell? She eats her way out. That would be like you getting stuck in your room and having a door made out of honey and wax that you had to eat through. Honestly, if it were me, that doesn't sound like too bad an idea. Let's go ahead and see what we have next. So that worker bee went ahead and chewed her way out of that cell, and then immediately she goes to work with her first job. Her first job is as a nursery bee, and her job, as you can see here, is to take care of the larvae. If you see all the white inside the cells here, those are baby bees. Those are larvae. And that worker is feeding those larvae so that they can grow and eventually pupate and become the adult honeybees that are going to take care of the rest of the hive. So the nursery bee, that's the very first job that honeybees have to do. And they're about 1 day old when they have to do it. Now the next job is as what we call a wax bee. Did you ever wonder where the wax comes from in a frame or in a honeybee hive? Well, it actually comes from inside the bees themselves. What they do is inside their body, sugars are mixed with enzymes and it creates wax. And the wax actually comes, as you can see here, out of little parts of their segments in their abdomen. And the honeybee will chew those little pieces of wax and then spit them out to make their hive. So the materials that they use to build their hive with come from inside their bodies. Could you imagine if maybe bricks or wood came out of the middle of your body? I think we'll let the honeybees stick to building their hives from their body, don't you? I think so. So after they are wax bees, their next job is to be what we call a gatherer bee. And it might sound like that means that those bees are going out to the flowers and getting the pollen and nectar, but that's not yet. What the gatherers do is they meet the forager bees at the front of the hive, at the entrance to the hive, and they take pollen and nectar from the forager bees and they swallow it. And that pollen and nectar goes into a special place called the honey stomach. And in the honey stomach, the pollen and nectar mixes with enzymes to make honey. And do you know how that gatherer bee gets that honey out of the honey stomach and into the cells? She throws it up. So if we take a look at this next picture here, you can see this gatherer bee throwing up the honey into a cell, which is where they store it. So yes, when you eat honey, you're actually eating bee vomit. But pretty doggone tasty. I think this picture is really interesting because look at all the colors in here. What you can see from there is that different flowers have different colors of pollen. And that pollen actually can make different kinds of honey, pollen and nectar. All right, so moving on, our honeybee is getting older and her next job is to be a guard bee. And the guard bees, their job is to stay at the entrance to the hive and to protect the hive from any intruders. And as you can see in this next picture here, these bees are defending the hive from this wasp. They don't want the wasp to get in to get any of their good sweet honey. Now as you can see down here too, we actually have a honeybee that looks like she didn't make it. And that happens a lot to the guard bees. The guard bees often have to use their stinger to defend their hive. And when honeybees use their stinger, they lose it and they will actually die. But for them, it's a sacrifice that's worth it because it keeps the hive safe and it keeps the honey safe. And that's why honeybee queens can lay thousands of eggs because they need to replace a lot of bees that are guard bees and that are taking care of the hive. And then the final job for our honeybee is to be a forager bee. This is the bee that we see that's out and about, the bee that we see on flowers, the bee that might be circling around and trying to land on your snow cone during the summertime. These are the bees whose job it is to go and get pollen and nectar from the flowers. And they can visit up to 100 different flowers in one trip. And when they come back, they will go ahead and give their pollen and nectar to the gatherer bee, and then they'll go back out and get more. Now, this is not a job that lasts very long, and in fact, the lifespan of a honeybee is not very long at all. It only lasts for about 6 weeks, and by the end of the 6 weeks, that honeybee is kind of beaten up. You can see on this one right here how their wing is kind of tattered a little bit and broken off, because birds will pick honeybees to try to eat them. Well, that honeybee has lived a long life for 6 weeks, and so usually after about 6 weeks and after her job as a forager, she's done. And she will die. But that's okay, because remember that queen is laying thousands of eggs, so there are many more honeybees out there. Now, one thing I want you to notice about this picture, as we transition into talking about what makes honeybees so important, is what this bee is doing. What she's doing is called pollinating. And when bees pollinate, as they get pollen and nectar from flowers, they actually drop pollen off at other flowers. That helps these flowers to grow. And a lot of plants rely on these flowers to be able to produce fruits and things that we need in order to be able to eat. If you take a look at the leg on this honeybee here, this is what's called a pollen basket. And that's where pollen is gathered, and she can take that back to the hive. And then, as this bee over here that is covered in pollen goes to a different flower, she could leave some of that pollen behind, and that will actually help to grow a whole new flower. When honeybees do this, that's called pollination, and it's one of the most important jobs that they have. Now, fortunately for them, they're built in a way that makes them really, really good at foraging and at pollinating. So if we move to our next slide, we can take a look at some of the things that make honeybees good pollinators. So if you go ahead and tap the first one for me. The first one is that honeybees are extremely mobile. So they move around really fast. They're also small, and they can move into really small little places. So the next one is that honeybees have those hairs. Remember, we call them setae. And those hairs can attract pollen, and the pollen clings to those hairs. So as they go from flower to flower, they're dropping off that pollen, and again, they're pollinating flowers so they can grow. So next, we have the fact that, and we can go ahead and do the next one too. Honeybees are adapted to feeding on pollen and nectar. So that's what they eat, and that's perfect for them because that's what they have for flowers. And then the last one is that they actually have specialized mouth parts for feeding on pollen and nectar. And so that's actually going to help these guys to get everything that they need. They have a nice long tongue to go into flowers. They actually are able to get way down in there and to get the pollen and the nectar that they need, especially the nectar, which is really what helps them to make the honey, okay? So that's what makes them very good pollinators. Now, they pollinate a lot of different plants, which means that we get a lot of good food out of it. So let's take a look at some of the things that honeybees, some of the plants that honeybees pollinate so that we can get some food. If you like apples or if you like strawberries, how about watermelon or grapes or cucumbers? That's one of my favorites. Tomatoes, even mustard, pumpkins, and almonds. If you like any of those are all foods whose plants are pollinated by honeybees. As a matter of fact, every third bite of food that you take, you owe to a honeybee. Imagine that. So it's a good thing we've got honeybees out there pollinating all these plants, or we might not have near as much food as we do. So what are some other things, other reasons why honeybees are so important? Well, in addition to pollination, they give us wax, and if we take a look at our next picture, they give us honey. That's right. If you like to eat honey at all, well, guess what? You're going to want to have some honeybees around because honey is good for you. It's a good source of energy, and it can help with different things like allergies. It's a great sweetener too. So honey is something that's really important. People also use wax to make a bunch of different things. If we want to show our next picture here, as you can see, honeybee products are used to make everything from lotion to chapstick to makeup to wax. Got some lotion here, as well as one of my favorite things, some candles. If you like candles, you want to thank a bee. Although a lot of candle wax is now made in factories, a lot of it is still made by honeybees. In fact, this candle right here is made from honeybees that lived right here in Aurora. Pretty cool. So honeybees are important for doing a lot of stuff like that. But not only that, they also give us medicine. If we flip to the next picture, honeybee propolis, which is a pollen product, actually can be something that you put into a drink to help get rid of allergies. And believe it or not, there's actually a type of therapy called bee venom therapy, where beekeepers use honeybees to sting people and help them with certain illnesses. Not something we recommend you try at home. Please don't ever try to sting yourself with a honeybee, but when in the hands of a trained professional, bee venom therapy can be very, very helpful. So honeybees do so many things that make them so important for people. Now, just a few little fun facts about honeybees. First of all, a hive of bees can travel 55,000 miles and visit 2 million flowers, and they will only make 1 pound of honey. That's not that much honey at all. The average worker bee makes 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in her lifetime. That's not very much at all. If we take a look at this little honey stick right here, it's like cutting off the top of that honey stick and just having that. So at 6 weeks, that's all they make. But if you get enough of them together, they can make a powerful, powerful batch of honey. A forager bee can visit between 50 and 100 flowers in one collection trip. They can fly up to 15 miles an hour, and not only do honeybees pollinate and give us food and honey and all those wonderful things, they also help us make money. Honeybee pollination is worth over $20 billion in the United States. That's a lot of plants being pollinated, a lot of food for us, and a lot of reason to take care of it to keep honeybees around. So now that we know how important honeybees are and why, what can we do to help honeybees out? Well, here's a few things before we go. First, we can plant a garden. Flowers or vegetables, because bees need to be able to find pollen and nectar, and they can find them in gardens. I have a couple of flowering plants on my deck at my apartment, as well as a tomato plant. And I see the bees around them all the time, so you don't need to have a big garden in order to be able to help out honeybees. Next, you can use few pesticides or none at all when you plant your garden. Pesticides are sprays that might help to kill off other animals that would eat your plants, but they actually can hurt honeybees. And so if you don't use pesticides, bees can come around and they can help your plants to grow. And last but never least, you can build a bee nest box like this one shown here. This nest box is for a type of bee called a solitary bee, and these are bees that live by themselves. And they may not make honey, but they help pollinate plants too. So these are all ways that you can help honeybees every day. And if you're wondering, well, how do I plant a garden? What pesticides are good for my garden? Or how do I build a bee nest box? Guess what? There are lots of instructions on the internet. You can find plenty of ways to go out and do that. So, for our last slide, I hope that we've all gotten to see now that honeybees are pretty spectacular creatures. They have a lot of jobs to do, and when they do those jobs, it can actually help us out. And now that we know how helpful honeybees are, maybe you can help honeybees out too by telling a friend how important they are. Or the next time you see a bee, instead of getting scared and running away, you might say, "Thank you, bee, for all the good that you do and for all the things that make you important for yourselves and for people." So I hope you guys have enjoyed the presentation. Now I hope you can get outside and go find some honeybees. Have a great day, everybody.